All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Cape Cod Technology Council's coffee Q&A. We do these once a month, usually about two weeks after our first Friday. And really excited to have Steve Gallien here today to talk about mapping applications. But just wanted to give you a heads up beforehand that our upcoming events next week, we have our Indoor Air Quality Summit. It's going to be a very important event. Please share with folks you know that maybe has a small business or homeowners as well, because the quality of our indoor air is a big factor in the transmission of the COVID-19 virus. And there are things that people can do to help mitigate that. So we're going to be talking about that. Our first Friday for February was postponed because of a snafu with the scheduling. So first Friday is actually going to be last Friday this month, on February 26th, with the executive director of the Marconi Society talking about digital inclusion. And then our first Friday in March is going to be some gentlemen from the Bridgewater State University talking about online learning and some of the ways they've had to pivot and the technology that they're using on online learning. So lots of great things about that. Also, next week, Wednesday, is our infrastructure committee meeting. It's an open meeting. Anybody can come, 9 o'clock on Wednesday. Sign up on the website. And we talk about everything from broadband to the electric grid to who knows what else. So lots of things happening. Hope you can join us. We've been very fortunate to have Cape and Plymouth Business Media helping us out to get the word out about our events. And as a thank you, Dale has been giving us a marketing tip at the beginning of each of our events. So, Dale, what do you have for us today?
Morning, Bert, and morning, everyone. Thank you. Marketing tip today, I wanted to talk about the power of press for ourselves, our greedy selves. A couple weeks ago, I talked about social proof. Social proof is a concept where the masses tend to follow the actions of the masses. I know that's like chicken or the egg, but how we can relate that to this week is doing press releases, for example. The Technology Council works with a local freelancer, wrote an article, and then Bert was interviewed by a local news organization. So these news organizations, including ours, we need content. There's a term we use called decay. The decay of content is so fast, it can be hours, which means our organizations constantly need new ideas. As fast as they're being created, they need to go out. So I am going to put in the chat here our contact information. If you ever have a story idea, something happening in your business, promotion, moving, we're always looking for things to talk about, and not just us. There are plenty of other organizations in Cape Cod looking for good stories. It's not always the negative things that we think about in the news. So that is my tip for today. Thank you.
Dale, great. Thanks so much. And just to Dale's point, I think we sent the press release out yesterday morning, and I got a call yesterday afternoon from one of the radio stations to talk about our indoor air quality event next week. So it really does work. So thank you, Dale. Um,
Great.
yes. And now I would like to introduce our moderator today, Robin Orbison, the owner of Space in Hyannis and Mashpee. And Robin actually has a background in doing interviews from New York City, I believe. So, Robin, why don't you take it away and introduce Steve?
Good morning. Thank you, Bert. Actually, I don't know about my background in interviews. In a former life, I was an associate producer and co-host of a public affairs program on a radio station in the Washington, D.C. area. We were on at 5 o'clock a.m. on Sundays. I think we had about 4 listeners, including the parents of the host. So that's my experience. But I am very pleased today to welcome my good friend Steve Gallien. I have known Steve for pretty much as long as I've been on the Cape, and we have started businesses at the same time and tracked each other's trajectories. So I'm very, very excited to have Steve join us this morning. Good morning, Steve.
Well, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Hi, I see some people I know from the past, including there's Steve and Eldon and Dale, of course, and probably some others that aren't on my screen. So
So Steve,
Robin talked about, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm gonna frame this a little bit. So in another previous life, I worked for a company that sold services to county governments. And so we decided that it would be really cool if we had a big map of all the states that we did business in, and those maps were delineated by county. So in other words, just county boundaries and county names, so that we could color in all the counties that we had signed up as clients. And as I recall, I think we spent about a month trying to find a place that would make such a map. And when we finally found them, we had to place an order, and I believe it took 6 weeks for them to produce the maps and ship them to us. And that was, try not to date myself here too much, but that was in the 80s. So we're going to fast forward to 30 or 40 years later, and Steve is going to tell us about how customizing maps is not only easy, but you can use maps in a creative way to create content that we never would have dreamed of as little as 10 years ago. So Steve, why don't you start out by tell us a little bit about you first. Tell us how you got into learning about map technology. And I actually understand that your involvement with map technology touches some pretty interesting large organizations such as the CIA and Google Earth. So tell us about that.
Yeah, well, sure. That's how I got my start while I was at CNN. I have a journalism background. I've done a lot of different things, but all through the years, consistently been involved with kind of like geo information. And so what I do now is I do not make maps, but I license the technology and the tools to other groups that do need to make maps. And these would include like commercial real estate companies and the news media. So I've been really more on the product management development side and the licensing side of proprietary technology. So the way I first got started was just before Desert Storm. And this group contacted us, and they were very happy to, quote, help us cover the story with some Earth images in this new thing they had invented. And so this was the first time that anyone had ever actually put, Earth images on TV in an interactive way. And so that's, let me share this screen here. I'll show you what this tool was called. Oh, can somebody help me enable me to do screen sharing? Would that be Bert?
You're good to go, Steve.
Hey, thank you. Let me see here. Okay. They had this thing called a Keyhole Earth Viewer. And this was in the early 2000s. They had created this spherical globe where you could pan and zoom and so on, which might sound familiar, only it was just a patchwork of images they had stuck on there, and it had big holes in it. Anyway, even to run this thing, you had to have a top, the best NVIDIA graphics card, a huge bandwidth pipeline, and the average person could not run it. So it turns out that this thing was funded by the CIA and the NSA. And so they were doing us a big favor in kind of showing us this technology and letting us use this on the air. So at that time, you could not do this. This came later, but if you did it on their tool and you would go into Baghdad, you would see nothing. So what my job was, I worked with them to get satellite imagery of Baghdad and the surrounding area to put into their tool called Keyhole. And I remember it was 12 DVDs full of GeoTIFF images that we overnighted to California and they stuck it onto their globe. And for a long time, that was the Baghdad imagery that you would have seen in Google Earth. And so my part was to get it on TV for them so they could increase their valuation, and they sold it to Google for 46 million of today's dollars. So that's kind of how I got started in that business. And but at the same time, we were able to do some things that no one had actually done in TV news before.
And then Steve, is it correct that when that was bought by Google, that this basically was the forerunner of Google Earth? Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. They bought the technology and they just converted it and repackaged it and lowered the price and made it available to consumers. And then along the way, they had to add a whole bunch of images, so they had a complete globe, a complete spherical coverage of the Earth. And that was it. The same guy that a little trivia, the same guy that invented this Keyhole thing was the guy who's responsible for Pokemon Go years later. And which, by the way, was making $2 million per day in its prime for them. A little later, so that got me on the road to really putting what I would call, actionable information into maps. So it's not just a map, it's what you can put into it to tell the story. So I co-invented this thing, which was an interactive viewing system for a touch screen. We did sell it to CNN and other people, and you could actually pull together a whole lot of different types of data and information, XML, GeoTIFFs, GeoJSON, stuff like that, and put it in this touchscreen environment where you could interact with it. And problem is, not only had it not been done before, but hardly anybody was ready to do it yet. So CNN was maybe my primary outlet for that.
Okay, so Steve, so tell us tell us a little about the organization that you work for now.
Yeah, well, right now I work with an organization called Map Creator. You can see my screen, right? So we are right off of this plaza in this town that's called Eindhoven. And Eindhoven was in the news last week. You saw people, they were having COVID protests there, but it's kind of a hotbed of technical development. A lot of mapping and cartography originated there, and they have a very large chip maker. It's the home of, Philips is based there, HERE technology, things like that. So now what I do is I work with clients who use their technology to show things in maps. And so I have license agreements that I do with, well, in this case, this is a French TV station that I worked with last month or 2 months ago. We developed a way for them to kind of do an interactive election map on TV. So the technology behind this really involves making the interface. And so, Robin, these states now are automatically colored based on what the data is telling them to do. There's no Photoshop needed here. And this is very similar to what John King used on the Magic Wall at CNN, only way less complicated, way less robust than what they've got. So I do that. And the way that we make money is we license this software technology to this TV station on a recurring basis.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the process of, how you go from, a media outlet or other user saying, we're interested in being able to have interactive mapping and looking at your product. What is your role in bringing that product to that user and helping them configure it and train them to be self-sufficient?
Yeah, well, of course, as Dale says, marketing is a lot of it just to get the attention, raise the profile. So people, there's a lot of competition in the mapping space, and more so every day. So there's a lot of inbound and outbound marketing, outreach, that kind of thing, and contacting people that we think are really likely users of the technology. And so the way that we get them into it is, of course, you have to show them why you're different, the value proposition, all that stuff. I built a prototype here for Pierre Olivier in Quebec. We had to do it all in French, and then he practiced with it and rehearsed with it until it got to, it looked and acted the way that they wanted to do it on TV. And then, we went from there. And now we're going to do the federal elections in Canada when Trudeau calls those, which could be any week now. So I don't know, did that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah. So look, a couple of things. First of all, who are the likely users for the product? I mean, obviously the media, but besides the media, who else are your clients?
Right now, the biggest secondary client would be commercial realtors, property developers, and property managers. And in the commercial sector, not the residential sector, but in commercial, the commercial sector, I work a lot, and I've got some examples here somewhere that show how they use maps to show where their properties are, showcase the locations, the nearby amenities, things like that. So they are very high-end users. They're in an industry that's really going crazy right now. So, and then I work with. I just assigned the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department major crime units yesterday. They will use the map to help coordinate their investigative efforts. I mean, they do extortions and kidnappings and things like that. So government agencies, nonprofits use it. Think tanks in Washington are using it to show, global areas of concern and hotspots and things like that.
And what about just the average business? I mean, so like for example, I have a business. I have a bricks and mortar business, and I paid somebody, 5 years ago, I guess, to create a custom map that shows where my location is with some landmarks and some arrows. And I understand that, I mean, that's a pretty, small use. But I can think that, some big corporations who do things other than real estate or media might have, might find a need to create custom mapping. Have you seen much of that, or do you have any examples of that?
I do. Let me back up here and go to some examples. So the way that the bigger companies, you can do a lot of the same stuff no matter how big you are. The only real difference is the bigger ones have the resources. They have designers. I'll show you the Washington Post here. They have a cartographer on staff, so they really can kind of take it to the limit. But a lot of this stuff will give you things that you could do, that the average person can do as well. Here's an example of a style we developed with USA Today. And so the question here is, how do you create a map style that fits their brand? And that's the biggest concern for a lot of them. If you take a really great web page and just stick a Google map on there, it's not as good as if your map fits with your whole design plan. So that's, in this case, they have a font family they like, they have a map style, they have a very minimalistic kind of way to do a map. They only show what they need you to see. It's not cluttered. And it's, if you see this, generally, if you look at USA Today a lot, you're going to know who it is. Here's another example. Similarly, let's go back. This is the Washington Post, and there's two things going on here. One is that the map they made with our system on the lower left is in their style, which is different. So they're looking for a tool where they can realize their stylistic vision and make it different than the next guys. And so that's what they're looking for in a mapping tool. They also, and this is another increasing trend, is they will combine a map with other types of visuals to share all that information. Where it is, they find the best way to show the data, which is in a graph, and so on. Here's another example. This is kind of another extreme of how you can take the same mapping tool and make it fit your brand. And so, Robin, that's what they want to do, is make it reflect what they want to say and make it look like it's them.
Okay, so it's not just, it's not just taking a map, adding content or taking away content in some cases, but it's also creating a visual appeal and a style that is aligned with the user's brand. Excellent.
That's exactly right. Very quickly, this is kind of an extreme of that idea. This is built in Germany, and you can see they started with the map, but it's almost gone now, and they've loaded so much information on it. I've just never seen anything like it, actually, but you can see there is a map in there. So
there is a map. We're getting a question from the audience. So where does the map data come from? So like, what's the underlying, before you take a map and add content or take away content and create styling, where's the underlying data coming from?
well, it comes from a number of sources. When we say map data, I mean, because that, I take it for granted. I say data, but it's not really, people are not clear what that is. Well, here's an example. This is a little bit of GeoJSON data. Now, this is the kind of data, it just comes in, it's just text, it's just code, and it will have all the stuff in it that the map needs to know to put the things in the right place. And so this has some latitude, longitude pairs in it. It has text. It has a way to display the text. And so that's one form of data. Another type of data, which is now very common, is KML and KMZ, which you may be familiar with. That's actually Keyhole markup language. It was invented by those guys in my first slide. And that shows polygons, if you needed to show, an area that's filled in with color. So a mapping tool will often accept a spreadsheet, it will accept GeoJSON, it will accept GPX or KMZ, a lot of different types of data to do different stuff. And the way you get that data is you can either put it in there yourself, you can upload it from a spreadsheet, for example. And I'm going to show you, Robin, I made a very simple little map that includes cache space, doing that. And you can also have your tool go out and get the data and fetch it and bring it back in and kind of automatically update your map. That's what we do with the election maps, is we have a very, very large data stream. So our server goes out, gets it, parses it, gets the parts that it needs out of it, and uses it to populate the map. So it's all, doing that's all automatic.
Okay, so where's the cache space map?
Let me skip ahead here. This is going to kind of touch on the idea of the free mapping tools. So I did this, and by the way, I think Robin's going to put some of these tool URLs and some resources in the chat, right? Okay. I've got a few of the more commonly, some of the more up and coming and some of the more established tools that all have free accounts that you can get and kind of try them yourself. This is called My Maps, pretty common with Google. And the idea about My Maps is that you can actually make your own Google map. And so you can use their tools and add stuff to it and make an interactive map. As I was saying, you can drag your spreadsheet in there. You can import all these file types that you see right here into the map to do different things. In this case, I had a series of places where I needed to go. And so I was going to try to hit all these businesses in one day. So I just put them in my spreadsheet with addresses. And now I can see the most efficient way to get from one to the other. And you can navigate to each one of those. And then in my phone, I could click on something like right here, and I would get, in very simple terms, your address and get directions. So then I need to go here, I can do that. Here's another example, Robin. This is something you could actually put on your site where a user could interact with that map, and then they could pull up your floor plan and see where you are and get, additional information, stuff like that. So
very cool. Okay, I just posted in the chat a number of free mapping tools the tools that Steve is talking about right now. So you can just pull these down and be a map making fool.
Hey, you want to see some more of those? I've got a few.
Yeah, show us some more.
Okay. This is a group that I've worked with occasionally called Mapbox. These guys are state of the art. They're one of the most advanced mapping companies there is right now. And the only downside is that they do so much that it can be overwhelming for an average user who just wants to make a map, but they do have a free account. And you can go in and kind of play around with their platform. All of their stuff is open source. They've invented a lot of the industry standard stuff right now. And they have a pricing plan that lets you get in there for free. You can make anything from this map was made in Mapbox to something more elaborate, that had like those election maps, that election map that I showed you. And they specialize in interactive maps. As you can see here, up to 50,000 map loads per month on your website is free. So you make a map, you post it, they know they can count your map loads. So you can get into that business for free. Data Wrapper is the one I hear about the most right now. This is a group in Scandinavia. I think they only have about 8 people on their team. So they have a very data-centric and automated platform that lets you go in and make a map step by step in kind of a guided fashion. And you can make things that would range from, say, a static locator map like this to something that's a little more elaborate. You can take the same data and make different stuff out of it. This is a cartogram where the actual countries will grow larger or smaller based on the number values that are in it. So you've seen those done with the United States, probably. I'm seeing more of this lately. It's a very graphic way to show that China, for instance, has a much larger number than the US. Here's another one. This one's called Flourish, which is similar to Data Wrapper, also has a free package, and it does data viz. Now, data visualization is really where this industry is going. I mean, there are people who still need to show a location, but the big interest right now is what kind of information can you put in the map, which is data. And so you could make something like this. This is interesting, where this shows the change over time in urban population, but as an area gets bigger or smaller, it goes up and down the ranking here. I think they call that a horse race graph. You could also take the same information, but you could show it in chart form. So some of these tools will let you take, data X and show it in very different ways, depending on, what you want to say.
Steve, we're getting a question here from the audience. Fred is curious about how IMAP features compare with those of US-based ArcGIS platform. Are you able to answer that?
Yeah, of course, IMAP is the previous name of my product, which doesn't exist now. We are Map Creator is kind of is the name of this other platform. So the way that ArcGIS is really the top of the line in terms of mapping capabilities. It's used by municipal governments a lot, and it has a huge tool set. It's also quite expensive. So that's one of the main differences. Is a lot of people I work with, like say the Washington Post, they will use our tool because ArcGIS is just simply more than they need most of the time. And one of the commonalities is that we will both use shape files. Like shape files is a way to show an area that is a shape on a map. And we can both use that same kind of data to make maps. Beyond that, we each have our own special niche, and the tools I work with now are kind of a lot simpler and faster, require a lower skill degree, to use them.
Steve, can you talk a little bit about the present and future state of this technology? So has your industry been impacted by the pandemic? We certainly see a lot of pandemic data in the news, so I'm wondering if there has been an increase in demand for your product as a result of the pandemic.
Yes, sir, it has been impacted, and yes, there has been an increase. I'm going to show you an example if I can find it, but in terms of news media, of course, as you know, like there's a lot going on in that industry, a lot of consolidation and a lot of cost cutting. So in some ways, the demand has been less due to coincidentally COVID and the decline of advertising revenue. They cut corners wherever they can. On the other hand, they've all been really focusing on COVID type graphics. So we've had an uptick in interest to show COVID data like from Johns Hopkins in a map. But the biggest surge I'm seeing is in the commercial real estate industry, which has really taken off during the COVID. And that's most of the demand there is so they can showcase their properties. I probably have an example somewhere of how they do that, just to kind of illustrate that for you. Let me see, here's one.
No, that's interesting. You're seeing the increase in demand from commercial real estate sort of across the board. Now, we know that here on the Cape, there's been an increase in commercial in real estate activity in general because of the exodus of people coming out of the big cities and wanting to come to places like this that they perceive to be safer. But you're seeing this across the board, not just in certain regions.
Yeah, I'm seeing it across the board. The little map I'm showing you right here is very typical of what they need to do in terms of mapping. They don't do a lot of interactive mapping right now because they're heavily focused on print brochures. They're moving into the digital realm a little bit more slowly, but yeah, I see this everywhere. I mean, we just closed one in Australia. I did one in Los Angeles a few days ago. They are everywhere. Canada. So, and I guess in situations like we've had, they tend to make money no matter what, especially when people are selling properties and prices are good.
Okay, and that's interesting. And where do you see this technology going? Are there changes in the technology itself that we should be looking forward to, or do you see game-changing changes in where the demand is coming from on the horizon?
Two good questions. Yeah. So let me see here. I'm going to play this so you can actually see this. Are you seeing the screen again?
Yes.
Okay. Well, something like this a few years ago, you just couldn't have made it. You couldn't have done this. Now you can do this in a tool that you can get, well, yourself. I mean, it may be a lot. You may not want to stop your job and make these maps, but it's far easier to do it now with off-the-shelf tooling. And you won't make election maps like this because that data is extremely expensive and proprietary, but all other kinds of data can be made interactive. So you'll see a lot of that. The maps that we did for TV can be put on the website as well, and people interact with those. So that data interaction is a growing trend, as well as really the automation of how you can make these maps, like when I showed Data Wrapper and Flourish. Those did not exist a few years ago. So it was kind of a mysterious science to do that, but now it's going to be much more routine.
So you see it becoming easier and easier for the average user.
Yes.
Okay. So question. So right now these tools are available. And for anybody who missed it, we did post the links to all the free tools that Steve mentioned into the chat. But even still, there's a little bit of a learning curve to work with these tools. And it's not like it's not like Canva, right? You don't sit down and create a document in 30 seconds. You need to put a little time and effort into learning the software. So if somebody was a user, a user, not CNN, just somebody who has a use for a map or two here and there, doesn't really, not their core business. They don't want to put the time it takes in to learn these applications themselves. Where might they start if they wanted help? Let's just say we've got a business owner out there who says, it'd be really helpful to me if I had an interactive map that did X, Y, and Z. How can I get help? Where do they go? What do they Google? Do they just Google Steve, or how do they find
Well, well, you can. Yeah, happy to help. Actually, any one of these platforms will have online tutorials. I mean, they all have pretty robust help files that I've seen. They may have little animations of how to do things. So depending on how much you want to get into the details and how technically oriented you are, you can do that. There are a lot of, and you've posted one link there, a lot of kind of GIS interest groups that have a lot of active members. That one in Boston, I think, has more than 700. And a lot of those people know people who can do map projects, and some of them are in that kind of thing. And that's where I would look. I don't do a lot of mapping at that level, but the Barnstable County has a lot of very intelligent, really smart, capable map makers in their organization, using things like ArcGIS, and they're writing some of their own code for maps. So if you know any of those folks, they know other people.
And is there a title for these folks? I mean, is there a profession that's called map designer or map technician?
Not most of the map production is done by depending on, no, say if you're a real estate, it's going to be the marketing department, and you may have a designer on staff, an illustrator. Now they're just going to learn the technology and use it. You will not have a map making specialist. You get big enough, like the Washington Post actually has a cartographer on staff. So does the New York Times. And now at that level, I mean, they're light years beyond the average business. So it could be marketing manager, marketing director, designer, graphics producer. So there are probably 15 titles that could include map making.
Okay, we're getting a question here from the other Steve on the call.
Yeah.
Question is, are you seeing any significant increase in misleading map and graphic information in this age of, the social dilemma?
That's a great question. I have not seen misleading map information, but there are misleading graphics out there. You see them where they can, especially in the area of poll results or charts or graphs, where you can kind of use the same information to reach different conclusions depending on how you present it. I don't know if you've heard of Fox News. They're very good at taking that and putting their own spin on the facts, so to speak. So I guess, yes, the answer would be yes, but I have not seen it in maps specifically.
Okay. All right. Well, we are at 45 minutes here, so we are wide open for audience questions. So if anybody wants to, anybody has any questions, just drop them into the chat, and we'll make sure that they get to Steve. But while we're waiting for that to see if any more questions come in, Steve, is there anything that I haven't covered that you'd like to enlighten us about with respect to map technology?
Well, in terms of technology, I can't think of anything really. There are things we can learn from how the pros make maps that apply to everybody at every level. The idea of keeping your map simple and only showing, the details that you really want to drive people's attention to. Is kind of less is more in terms of map making, which is really part of the art of using maps. And the technology does allow you now to say, take the labels out of your map and put only the key ones back in that you want people to see, if that makes any sense. So you're able to make a map that gets your point across a lot faster.
So it's a little bit of a marriage of a science and an art.
That is true. That is true. So But you may see somebody doing something at a very high level, and like, you know, somebody in some big organization may do something at a high level, but you can get some tips from that. Let me see, here's one real quick one, which is the idea that people now are, what they're doing is they're combining, like, this is satellite imagery and a street map, and you can just take a little screenshot from Google Earth, you can use Canva, stick it on top of your map, and there you go. But it shows where it is and what it looks like. So you see a lot of this kind of mixed media kind of things going on now in mapping, and the technology now makes that really easy.
You know, just to go back a second to the concept of, you know, do these folks have titles? Just this is more of a comment than a question, but, you know, we've had in the last few, you know, we do these Q&As every month, and we had. I'm thinking of a speaker we had maybe a year or so ago who came to us and talked about cryptocurrency. And we have a speaker coming up in May who's going to be talk about extended reality, which is, you know, virtual and augmented reality, and how those these are technologies, and like what you're talking about, these are technologies that are becoming more and more prevalent, and there are more and more uses for them. The tools are becoming more and more robust. And what you're describing, I believe, is that the power users of these tools are sort of being homegrown in organizations that just have a need, correct? So you have companies that are creating the products, but the users are basically, they're people in these organizations that are sort of self-teaching themselves to become the resident experts on these products, and that there's no real place for them. There's no formal track for becoming a map technician. And we found that the same thing happened when we talked to the Bitcoin people, that there really was, at least this was 2 years ago, things change very rapidly in technology, obviously, but there was no school for learning, you know, blockchain technology. And so self-taught individuals were suddenly becoming, you know, commanding very high salaries just because there was a lack of places for them to get these skills. And our speaker coming up in May is going to be talking about exactly that same issue with respect to extended reality. And so that company, it's called XR is trying to create a path, a training and career path for people in the VR and AR realm, because the demand is growing exponentially and the skills just don't exist to fill all the need. So do you see that as a similar thing in this technology?
Well, I see really two cases, one of which is similar to that in what I do. One is that companies generally are not going to have a mapping specialist. I mean, you know, they're going to have somebody who had to learn the technology, and they may have the advantage of some tutorials or whatever, but they also will do some other job in the company, usually design. So there is no real formal track for them. I mean, they're going to be a designer anyway, so that's their career path. And now, if they want to specialize in, you know, geoinformation, especially if they're like in a municipal government, is going to be using ArcGIS or something like that, there are definite training tracks they can do to get up to speed, and that is a position that they could go do somewhere else. So there is a natural career path for those people. But as far as you know, VR or something like that, I don't know. Maybe they just have more demand than they have people.
Okay. So we're at 10:50 here, so I think we have time for one more question before I send it back to Bert. And I'm going to ask, I believe it's Tom from Recycling Rules. Tom, would you mind unmuting yourself and stating your question?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tom. I'm in P-Town, and I run a nonprofit called Recycling Rules, and we're building a multi-site platform on WordPress that will generate websites for municipalities across the US, but I'm going to build them for everyone on the Cape. And the platform actually uses multiple maps One of the maps that we need, if a town doesn't already have one, would be to show the curbside pickup. And that's a perfect use of like polygons. And I'm using Google My Maps. I was just wondering if there's a better alternative that is either very inexpensive or free. The Google My Maps drawing mechanism is really cumbersome.
I guess you get what you pay for in that. I'll have to think. I don't know. I kind of don't do a lot hands-on. I don't do much hands-on map making these days at that level, but it's a good question. I think, you know, I would investigate at least a couple of those other tools that I showed you, like maybe Data Wrapper or Flourish. And most of those do take, you know, shapefile or KML, KMZ kind of import. But
Okay.
I wish I could answer your question more directly.
Well, I have a follow-on question. A second map we have on the site is to show people where their recycling actually goes after it's, you know, leaves their curbside or, you know, their transfer station. And we're using Google Maps API for that. And I was, people have mentioned My Map or Mapbox. Do you know how the pricing compares relative to Google Maps API? Because it's all based on how many views there are to the maps.
Yeah, well, Google, of course, you can get away with a lot of views until they want to push you into the enterprise level. And the Mapbox, as I showed, will allow 50,000 map loads per month. And in a lot of cases, that's more than enough for you.
Okay.
Everybody has kind of a different way of measuring what is a map load, but they've simplified it at Mapbox. And I was looking for I can't find their pricing sheet right now, but yeah, so you can do a lot with Mapbox at free. And then after that, you can increase it. It's really like, I think it goes from there to like $5 a month or something. So, and they have, if you want to look for one place that has the best set of tools, that would be them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Steve, it's been a pleasure as always. Thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you for enlightening us on this fascinating topic. I think you've got us all thinking about how we could use maps more in our businesses and our organizations. So thank you. And with that, I'm going to send it back to Bert.
Robin, thanks so much. Steve, this is wonderful. You know, you and I have had some conversations, some casual conversations at Cape Space as we've run into each other. And I had a vague idea of what you were doing, but this just completely opened it up for me. So,
oh, good.
So much for sharing this. I think there's some great useful information here, and I hope that everybody has a chance to do that. Make sure you, folks, you can download the chat so you can grab the information that's in there. So do that before we end the meeting. That I would just like to say thank you, everybody. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Robin. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Dale, for supporting us. And look forward to seeing you next week, either at our infrastructure meeting or at the Indoor Air Quality Summit. So take care, everybody. Enjoy your Friday and your weekend and your long weekend.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all, everybody.
Have a great weekend.
So long. Bye, Steve. Bye, Robin. Bye, Bert. Bye, everyone.
Bye.